Hello, also from my side, a warm welcome, and I will give you a short presentation about Fasciola hepatica on dairy farms in the European Alps, the increasing prevalence and the risk factor for Salmonella Dublin infections. So a brief introduction about the parasite itself. It's Fasciola hepatica is an economically important infection of domestic livestock worldwide, and the parasite can impair animal health, animal welfare, and the productivity as well. The final hosts are, in our cases, ruminants, particularly cattle, but also some wild animals are a potential reservoir, for instance, rabbits, hares, deers, nutrias, and rats. The intermediate host is in Central Europe, the Galba truncatula. It's a drought-bound snail, and the habitat is strongly influenced by environmental conditions. And economic losses in clinically inapparent infected animals has been described previously. Also keep in mind the prepatent period of at least 8 weeks. This is a study conducted in 2005 by Mate et al. And they analyzed in the same study area we did in 2005. They analyzed bulk tank milk samples looking for liver fluke antibodies, in total 4,657, and the herd level seroprevalence was 73%. Now, this is a brief information about Salmonella Dublin. It's a cattle-associated pathogen, and clinical signs are in cattle especially bacteremia, enteritis, and reproductive disorders, abortion, for instance, but also depression and pneumonia is described in calves. It's a zoonotic pathogen, and it can lead to severe cases of illnesses in humans. And also there's also a endemic area for Salmonella Dublin in Kitzbühel and Kufstein, which is also part of our study area in Tyrol region. And it was also described as that positive human cases could be traced back due to the consumption of unpasteurized cow's milk and veal from domestic slaughtering. And also in previous times, there has been described a link between liver fluke and Salmonella Dublin infections. So we aimed first to assess the seroprevalence of Fasciola hepatica titus in dairy farms in Tyrol in 2023 using bulk tank milk samples. Then we aim to compare the current Fasciola hepatica levels with the previous studies from 2005, which I told you before, and also an increase is expected due to environmental changes. And finally, we aim to evaluate a potential connection between Fasciola hepatica antibodies and Salmonella Dublin antibodies in bulk tank milk samples. Right. So in 2023, we analyzed in total 3,645 bulk tank milk samples, and we used the ELISA kit from the company of IDEX. This is a map of Europe. We see here Austria, and in this red box, we see the western part of it, which is Tyrol. And here we see the map, and we see in the green dots are the negative herds. The yellow was the weakly positive with low antibody titers. The orange was with moderately antibody titers, and the red ones are the strongly positive ones with high antibody titers. And we see in the eastern part of it actually a high intensity of farms, but also with high antibody titers. Now, this is the comparison with farms from 2005 and with farms from investigated 2023. And we see, especially in the group of the high-level antibody category with high antibody titers, there was an increase of about 15%, while it's the reverse in the negative category. This is an overview of at the district level, and Kitzbühel, Kufstein, and Schwarz was highly endemic. Also, Kitzbühel is the region where Johannes talked before. This is also the region where he had his holidays. Now coming to the next result, It's about Salmonella dublin and Fastilla hepatica, and we see on the graphic that on the left side the liver fluke positive farms are described, on the right side the liver fluke negative farms, and we see that farms tested positive for a liver fluke infection have significantly more Salmonella dublin infections. So to sum up, we observed an increase of over 13%, and we also observed that it's the significantly higher prevalence of Salmonella dublin in liver fluke positive farms. So there is a trend of an increasing prevalence of liver fluke in Tyrol, although it's also possible that these are just annual fluctuations and not a continuous upward trend. And furthermore, the implemented control measures don't seem to be sufficient because the prevalence did not decrease since 2005. And one reason for the increasing prevalence might be that now more cattle are grazed on pasture than in the years before. And it's also very likely that the climate conditions in Tyrol are favoring Fastilla hepatica infections with a moderate climate and high precipitation and the spring water in the mountains. So coming to the end, I'd like to thank Barbara, my supervisor, and the Institute of Parasitology, also the Animal Health Service in Tyrol, and the AGES, the Austrian Agency for Health and Food, the LKV Tyrol, and also the Ministry for Agriculture and Forestry. So thank you for your attention.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Johannes. I think if there are questions, we keep questions. Or no, why not? We can also just let the questions be asked now. So there's one question. Can you switch on your microphone? From Johannes. I don't find that anymore. Where was it? Yeah, Johanna Czerny. Can you switch on your microphone if you have a question?
I don't have a question.
Hello? Hallo? Hören Sie mich?
Ja.
Hören Sie mich?
Yeah. Yes.
My question is, why is there, wie sagt man da, eine Korrespondenz? Why are the liver flukes, if the liver fluke level is high, why is the Salmonella dublin, is it coexisting, or why is it high when the liver fluke is high? Was ist der Zusammenhang?
So the question is, what is the connection between Salmonella, if they cause each other or if it's just a co-occurrence? Severin?
Yes, actually, until now we don't know exactly why, but there are several assumptions we thought about it. For instance, it could also be that they sharing environmental factors, because, for instance, alpine pasturing also creates favorable conditions for both pathogens, for instance, Salmonella dublin and Fastilla hepatica, and they existing at the same habitat also when different cows or cattle are grazing, and we just it can be that it's just coincidence, and actually we don't know until now what's the reason, but it also can be that it's also a parasite mediated transport. For instance, when cattle get infected orally with the metacercaria, maybe they transport some bacteria when they penetrate the duodenum. But actually, this is just a hypothesis.
Thank you. Edwin has a question.
Yeah, thanks for your presentation. Very interesting. You see huge differences in prevalence and perhaps also in infection intensity between regions. Do you think it's just a matter of habitat, or are there different management or grazing practices between those regions that could have an influence, or treatment regimens that could have a reason, or could be the reason for these regional differences?
Actually, the eastern part of it, where we saw the high intensity of high antibody titers, there is also a high intensity of farms, and this region is the animals are more than in the western part, for instance. Also, but I also think the habitat for the parasite is optimal. It's a very good habitat, and also the pasture areas are more flat than, for instance, in the western part. So I think it's a management thing, but also the habitat is a bit different regarding to other regions in Tyrol.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
There's one more. No more question. So perhaps if you have further questions, you can also ask them after my short presentation, because this is just a more in-depth description of the parasite dynamics. So since there's such a high prevalence, we wanted to do a detailed analysis of the endoparasite dynamics on the selected farms. So this is also where Severin is involved, but also other doctoral students like Florian Untersweg and Barbara Saska, but some more. And this is the project Food, because it's not only on Fasciola, but also on Ostratacea and Dictyocaulus. So Fasciola, Ostratacea, Dictyocaulus. And so for Fasciola, we wanted to do a quantitative sedimentation. We used the fluke finder to increase sensitivity. We also used the copro antigen ELISA. And what we can see here on this farm, this is just for 1 year. We investigated those farms for 2 years. What we can see was this dynamic we could observe on single farms. Dairy cows were often almost 100% positive throughout the whole Alpine season, while second season grazers increased in prevalence over the Alpine season. First season grazers, of course, were negative at the beginning, or most of the time, were negative at the start of the Alpine season, and then were positive in autumn. And if you consider the prepatency of 2 months, probably they got infected late in August when they were on the low Alpine pastures, not on the high Alpine pastures, but on the low Alpine pastures. However, this dynamic was not the same at each farm. For example, here, also prevalence in dairy cows was increasing throughout the Alpine season. And also here, some of the first season grazers already got infected earlier in summer when they still were on high Alpine pastures. So there is also an infection risk on high Alpine pastures. So what we can see that there is a high prevalence on the examined farms and throughout Tyrol. There are individual patterns of fasciolar dynamics, and dairy cows are often the group most highly infected, but often they are not treated because they are producing milk. And the first season grazer infection often occurs in late summer, autumn, when they are on the low Alpine pastures, close to the farm, on pastures that were grazed by dairy cows before. But in some farms, infections also occurs on high Alpine pastures. Challenges of anthelmintic treatment, of course, is that there is no residual effect of anthelmintics, and especially in dairy cows, only albendazole and oxyclosanid can be given, and this can only be given when the liver fluke is in an adult stage. And what we also observed was that treatment was done too early with these compounds when they were still not in the adult stages. So this is also an important point to consider. So our recommendations for control of fasciola is improving grazing management, especially also slurry management, because slurry is brought up to the Alpine pastures, and slurry contains fasciola eggs, and then snails will be infected. Then avoiding grazing young animals on pastures grazed by dairy cows before, if these are moist pastures, and exclude snail habitats from grazing areas. Perhaps virtual fencing would be a possibility. And then, of course, diagnose before treatment and treat at the right time. I also quickly want to give an overview on ostatagia, because with the prevalence study in cooperation with the Animal Health Services and also Boehringer Ingelheim, we saw that also in Tyrol the prevalence is very high, while it is lower in Upper Austria, probably because in Lower Austria a lot of cattle are not on pasture, a lot of dairy cattle. And so this is again a bulk milk analysis on ostatagia ostatagiae, and so dark red is highly positive farms, red is positive farms, and we see there are a lot of positive and highly positive farms in Tyrol. Not surprisingly, because they are on pasture for a very long time. And then when we looked in the specific dynamics on the farms, we used the mini Flutag technique because it is very precise, a very precise technique, and cattle normally doesn't have such a high egg shedding, and then we can get more detailed information on the egg shedding. And we also did larval culture, and Professor Gilliard from Canada also did the NGS analysis on that. And we also look for lungworms. And when we look at the mean results, we have this typical dynamic. Johannes said, but this is not observed on all farms. And that is true. We did not observe the peak in all farms in summer. Sometimes we also had the peak in autumn. But when we're looking at the mean, we still have the peak in summer. And maximal values were 1,500, or also in second season grazers. So the red one are the first season grazers, and second season grazers maximum values were on 300. And these are normally values where you think the animals would definitely benefit from treatment. So some veterinarians told me that they do not think that the cattle or young stock would have problems with parasites when they are on the high alpine pastures, because it's so cold there and there's so much space where they can graze. But what we could observe here is that even in high altitude pastures, there are high infections possible with ostatagia ostatagiae. And when we looked at the NGS analysis, we saw that ostatagia was the predominant species, followed by Coparia. And when we then looked in detail in the age groups, it were the young animals where we had Coparia, while we almost only had ostatagia in milk cows. So first season grazers have infections that are clinically relevant. Second season grazers partly also have quite high infection levels and would benefit from treatment, but not all of them. So it's very important to consider selective treatment. And the effect of ostatagia infection on milk cow production needs to be further investigated. So at the moment, we don't want to give advice on that. And so we will develop management recommendations which will then be shared with the animal health services. So thank you very much for your attention, and we are open for questions for any of the talks. So from Severin, from me, from Edwin, from Johannes, perhaps you have some further questions on that.